Hello. Well, I'm Piero, and the time has come, I think, to go ahead and talk about my philosophical education and background, kind of how I came to what I think now. Now, lots of people have asked me this over time, and it's my policy not to tell them anything about it because, for various reasons. One, I'm not going to use my education as sort of some sort of support for my points. When people come in and ask me what my education is after seeing one of my video, I have no intention of telling those people uh, something about my educational background, because I'm also not going to uh, I'm not going to admit that there's a problem with my idea. I'm not going to lend credence to it because of my education. Neither am I going to accept there's a problem. I get the question in both directions. People sometimes, as a compliment, they're asking me, "Well, do you have a PhD? Are you a teacher?" Sometimes people are like, "Oh, you haven't been exposed. You know nothing about this subject." They come in, like on metaphysics. They often just come in and say, "Oh no, well, you're mistaken. You have metaphysics," and they'll sometimes be. It's kind of comical because they'll act, for example, that my ideas on metaphysics come from being taught about like theistic metaphysics, and really, if they were formally educated, they would see that my criticism of these things is informed by a formal education on that subject. But I'm not changing my policy. If people come and ask me, "Oh, what's your education?" After seeing one of my videos, I'm going to tell them the same thing I always tell them. I'm not going to point them at this video. Other people can if they want, but I'm not going to, because I think that they have to address the points as points. But I do think that there's, some of the curiosity is justified. People are just somewhat interested, and I think that I myself have reason to give you this part of my story and maybe be able to refer to it more, insofar as these are my formative philosophical experiences, and it does include education. Okay, so no, I don't have a PhD in philosophy, but here's the philosophical story for me. Well, first of all, I'd say let's start. I was about 5 years old, and I was in the Sierra Mountains with my grandmother, and we were over a creek, on a bridge over a creek, and we looked down in the creek, we saw fish down there. And my grandmother said, "Hey, wouldn't you like to have a fishing pole and toss it in there and pull that fish out?" And I said to my grandmother, "Why, Grandma, what did that fish ever do to you?" This was not a moment of animal rights activism per se for me. I was in the rancher area. I went deer hunting and whatnot with, my family. I never got on their case because, "Oh, you're hunting," or anything like this. No, it was a moment of relativism. See, I just figured that if we were going to make a decision about something to do that involved that fish, that the fish's point of view is a part of that equation. That's something we should find out. That's a relativist position. As I grew up, I did learn, why fishermen don't consult with the fish. And, I was able to understand that and handle that. But, we do think of the point of view of these animals, because even in the case of a hunter that might not worry about the fact that an individual animal doesn't want to get eaten, we still think of it from their point of view in the sense of, well, we don't want to kill every fish. We want to hunt sustainably. So that's relativism. If you fast forward then about 8-10 years, I'm 12 or 13 years old. And I like a lot of weird subjects. I'm talking New Age metaphysics with my grandmother's late into the night, and I'm talking introspective philosophy with my father, and I'm liking all these weird subjects. And I really wanted to figure out, I'm walking down, I have a very clear memory of walking, thinking about these things, trying to wrap them up into one question. Luckily, I didn't just discover, "Oh, I like philosophy, I'm glad." Instead, what I did is I formed all of the questions I was asking, all these weird subjects of intellectualism, which included science. I loved physics. What was the question? and I came up with the question of what is reality. Now, I think the question of what is reality is itself a confusing question, or at least I remember being quite confused by it. It was hard for me to know whether I was what I was asking. You know, what do we think is reality? What it really is reality? Just what all the things the word can refer to. And I started wanting to sort those things out, and I basically did. You know, and the confusing part had to do with the fact that I knew everybody had their own picture of reality, and a lot of times when people were talking about reality, they were telling you their version of it, you know, their picture of reality. And yet there is this idea that the word reality, even if it refers first to an idea, well, that idea itself is supposed to refer to this material world. Now, I really love science for two reasons. One, it answers this question. It tries to answer in as literal a way possible what the world is. But also because it was one of the weirdest kinds of truths out there. I mean, I could sit there and talk about ideas about reincarnation all night, and there was a liberation to it because you could just make shit up. You know, well, what about this? What about if we get reincarnated as trees? You know, what about? But the fact is that physics is the weirdest of all. Truly, truth is stranger than fiction in modern physics. And I appreciated that part of it. And the fact that it was real was just a wonderful, a wonderful coincidence or something, a reason to go ahead and study it. So really, this question still unifies my philosophy. I'm curious to know about reality. Around this time, I was starting to learn how to computer program, and I was getting exposed to logical analysis that way, to a very practical, pragmatic kind of logical analysis that way. And that's really when I started doing philosophy, probably. I did not realize that this logical analysis was philosophy. So then came time to go to college. Well, I figured I would study math and physics and logic, and I didn't intend to get a math or physics degree. I figured I would get a physics degree, but I didn't plan to have a math or science career. I actually thought I would be a writer. But what I wanted to know and the philosophy I wanted to learn was the philosophy of physics, so I was going to take a lot of physics, and I did. I went to school, I started taking full-time physics and math and logic. And the logic was very interesting because I found I had been lied to. I mean, I had been under the impression that philosophy was just a bunch of bullshit, more or less. Fun, you know, like picking up a book of brain teasers. Maybe interesting, but not that. There's no hardcore aspect to philosophy. But then I took my first logic class, and I'm looking at at the course catalog, and I'm noticing all the logic classes are in the philosophy department. I'd been told specifically, get any degree, but not a philosophy degree. Well, I took that first logic class, and I did really well in it. It came to me naturally. It's a funny thing, because, Logic 101, basic logic, very easy class. I think a lot of people would agree with me. Some people in there, though, are just confused. It's like, this is word problems without even any numbers. It's the worst of the word problems. It's word problems and there's only words. And to me, it made a lot of sense to a lot of people. It was confusing, and I sort of took to it. And as I say, it was a bit of a revelation. This was all in philosophy. Well, it turns out my parents could not pay for college, and I built up a debt for my dorm because they couldn't pay that. And I had to drop out for a while. I had to work my way back into school. So I worked my way through school as a programmer. As I said, I had already been programming. So the school I was attending was the University of California at Berkeley. And they have a good philosophy department. And an interesting thing about that philosophy department is, and Berkeley in general, is that Berkeley has a good, ranks well as a graduate school. As an undergraduate school, it does so-so. But what that meant to me was that if I just went and let them give me an undergraduate degree, I would not be doing as well as I could